It's a warm evening in late spring 2010. The Hudson family home buzzes with excitement as everyone gathers for the annual family reunion. But as cheerful as it all seems, Claire stands quietly in the kitchen, gripping her glass of wine, her mind replaying the events of the past few months. She has known for a while now a gut-wrenching truth that slowly unfolded before her eyes. Her husband Luke had been having an affair, not just with anyone, but with her boss, Rebecca. She has been holding on to this information, plotting how best to expose them both and reclaim control of her shattered life. Claire Hudson's life had always followed the path she imagined as a young girl growing up in Atlanta, Georgia. She had been an ambitious student, determined to carve out a future where she could combine her love for architecture and business. It was in her junior year of high school that she met Luke, a charming, easygoing boy with a love for building things. They were drawn to each other quickly, and before long, they became inseparable. Luke shared Claire's enthusiasm for the future. He had dreams of owning his own construction company one day, working with his hands to build homes for families just like the one he hoped to start with Claire. At 23, Claire and Luke married. It was a beautiful day in the earliest summer of 2005. A small ceremony with their closest friends and family. They bought a modest home in the suburbs, full of hope for the life they were going to create. Claire began working as a real estate agent at Shaw Realty, a prominent firm in Atlanta, where she quickly proved herself to be talented and driven. She loved her work, helping people find the perfect homes for their families. Luke, on the other hand, worked long hours as a construction foreman, gradually climbing the ranks in his company. Both of them were committed to their careers, eager to establish themselves financially so they could enjoy the life they envisioned. However, as the years passed, the cracks in their seemingly perfect marriage began to show. By 2009, Claire started noticing subtle shifts in Luke's behavior. He was coming home later and later, often citing work meetings or late projects that kept him away from home. He was more distant, less affectionate, and seemed distracted even when they were together. Claire, still deeply in love with him, tried to push these thoughts away, convincing herself that the strain was temporary, a natural result of their demanding jobs. She thought that once their careers stabilized, their marriage would return to the passionate and loving relationship it had once been. It was around this time that Claire noticed the growing friendship between Luke and Rebecca Shaw, her boss. Rebecca was a powerful figure at Shaw Realty, known for her fierce ambition and commanding presence. At 45, she was older than Claire, but had a magnetic personality that drew people toward her. Rebecca had always been somewhat controlling in the office, with a habit of asserting her dominance over others, but Claire respected her for her success. Rebecca and Luke seemed to hit it off during the company dinners and events they attended together, but Claire didn't think much of it at first. Rebecca often invited the couple to social gatherings, and Claire assumed it was her boss's way of showing appreciation for her hard work. As 2010 approached, things started to change. Luke's absences became more frequent, and his explanations less believable. Claire's suspicions began to grow when she noticed Luke spending more time at the office of Shaw Realty, under the guise of helping Rebecca with some renovation projects. Rebecca's behavior also became more questionable. She would make offhand comments at work that felt too familiar, referencing Luke in ways that seemed inappropriate. There were subtle touches at company events. Rebecca's hand on Luke's arm for just a little too long. The way her eyes lingered on him during conversations. It made Claire uncomfortable, but she tried to brush it off, telling herself that Rebecca was just being friendly. The tension in Claire's mind continued to build over the next year. She often felt like an outsider in her own marriage, watching Luke grow closer to Rebecca while her relationship with him grew more distant. The realization that something was wrong was gradual, like a slow-moving storm that suddenly overtakes the sky. By the summer of 2011, Claire couldn't ignore the signs anymore. She was no longer just suspicious. She knew something was happening between them. In early September, while Luke was out working late, Claire found herself alone in their bedroom, her heart heavy with doubt. As she absent-mindedly scrolled through the apps on Luke's phone, which he had carelessly left behind, she stumbled upon a series of messages that confirmed her worst fears. Rebecca had been sending Luke texts, intimate, suggestive messages that left no room for misinterpretation. The affair wasn't just a fleeting suspicion anymore. It was real, staring her in the face. Claire's world came crashing down. The betrayal cut deep, not just because Luke had been unfaithful, but because it was with Rebecca, a woman Claire had trusted and admired professionally. The pain was sharp, but so was her anger. Claire had never imagined herself in this situation, yet here she was, reading through the remnants of a love affair between her husband and her boss. But instead of confronting them immediately, Claire made a choice. She wasn't going to burst into an emotional confrontation. She was going to wait, plan, and expose them both in a way that they couldn't deny. The upcoming family reunion in November would be the perfect opportunity. Everyone would be there. Her family, Luke's family, and even Rebecca, who had been invited by Luke under the guise of a work celebration. Claire spent the following weeks preparing, her pain simmering beneath the surface. She went through the motions of daily life, barely able to look at Luke without feeling disgust, but she held her tongue. The tension in the air was palpable, but Luke seemed oblivious, perhaps too caught up in his affair to notice Claire's growing coldness. Rebecca, too, continued on, as if nothing were amiss, showing no signs of guilt or shame. By the time the day of the reunion arrived, Claire was ready. She had gathered enough evidence, texts, photos, and receipts to prove the affair beyond any doubt. All she had to do was wait for the right moment to reveal everything and watch as their carefully constructed lives unraveled before their eyes. The night of the family reunion was supposed to be a joyful event. It was late November 2011, and Claire Hudson had meticulously planned everything. The lights were soft and warm, the smell of home-cooked food filled the air, and the sound of laughter and conversation echoed through the house. The Hudson home, always praised for its beauty and welcoming atmosphere, was the perfect setting for what everyone thought would be a normal family gathering. But for Claire, it was far from normal. Beneath her calm exterior, she was a storm ready to unleash the truth. She had been waiting for this moment, watching as her husband and her boss smiled and mingled with her family, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. As the evening progressed, with most of the family settled in the living room, enjoying drinks and casual conversations, Claire felt the weight of the secret pressing on her chest. She could see Luke laughing with her parents, and Rebecca sitting confidently on the other side of the room. Rebecca with her perfect posture and commanding presence, had always held herself above others. Claire felt a mixture of disgust and anger watching them both, knowing the betrayal they had committed together. She had spent months preparing for this, gathering evidence, and now was the time to expose it all. When Claire called for everyone's attention, the room fell silent. The mood shifted from one of light-hearted conversation to a thick, tense atmosphere. Everyone could sense that something was coming, but no one could have predicted what would happen next. Claire's voice was steady, but there was a quiet fury in her tone. She announced the affair between Luke and Rebecca with cold precision, detailing how she had discovered the texts on Luke's phone. She didn't hold back, revealing everything she had uncovered over the past few months. The weight of her words hung in the air, and the room filled with a stunned silence. Claire's family was the first to react, their faces a mix of shock and anger. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. Luke, who had always been seen as the perfect husband, was exposed for what he truly was, a man who had betrayed his wife with her own boss. Claire's parents, who had loved Luke like a son, sat in disbelief, their expressions hardening as Claire laid out the proof. She showed the texts, explicit enough to silence any denial. Luke tried to protest at first, his face flushing with embarrassment, but it was no use. The evidence was irrefutable. Claire had caught him, and there was no escaping it now. As the family absorbed the information, Claire watched Luke squirm under their judgment. It was a strange moment for her, a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. She had loved Luke once, deeply, but now she felt nothing but anger and resentment. He had destroyed everything they had built together, and she was finally free from the lie she had been living. But the real shock came not from Luke's reaction, but from Rebecca's. Rebecca Shaw had always been a woman who prided herself on control. She had built a successful real estate firm, commanding respect and admiration from those around her. She was used to being in power, both in the office and in her personal life. But as Claire's words sank in, and the weight of the affair became public knowledge, Rebecca's control slipped away. She had not expected to be exposed like this, and certainly not in front of a room full of people. The humiliation was too much for her. Caught off guard, Rebecca's face twisted with rage. She stood up abruptly, her composure shattered, and without thinking, grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter nearby. Her eyes locked onto Claire, filled with fury. In her mind, Claire had ruined her, destroyed her reputation, her career, and everything she had worked for. And now, in front of everyone, she wanted revenge. The room erupted into chaos as Rebecca lunged toward Claire, the knife gleaming in the dim light. The attack was swift, almost too quick for anyone to react. Claire, though filled with shock, moved instinctively. She barely dodged the wild swing, stepping back as Rebecca's momentum carried her forward. The family around them screamed, trying to process what was happening, but it was all moving too fast. In the confusion, Rebecca stumbled. Her high heels slipped on the hardwood floor, and she lost her balance. Time seemed to slow as she fell forward, her body hurtling toward the ground. In a horrifying twist, Rebecca landed on the knife. The blade pierced her abdomen with a sickening thud, and she collapsed in front of everyone. The entire room fell into stunned silence as Rebecca lay on the floor, the knife still embedded in her, blood quickly pooling around her. Claire stood frozen, her heart racing, as her mind tried to catch up with what had just happened. She hadn't intended for things to escalate like this, but now there was no going back. Rebecca's life was slipping away, and everyone in the room could feel the gravity of the moment. Luke rushed to her side, panic written across his face, but there was nothing he could do. The damage had been done. Rebecca, once so powerful and in control, was now lying helpless, her life fading with each passing second. Claire watched as the scene unfolded, her emotions a mix of shock, horror, and disbelief. Rebecca died moments later, leaving the room in a state of chaos. The night had turned from one of quiet revelation to violent tragedy in an instant, and nothing would ever be the same again. The aftermath of Rebecca Shaw's death unfolded in a way that no one in the Hudson family could have anticipated. On the morning of March 6, 2010, the Hudson home was no longer the warm and welcoming place it had been the night before. Instead, it became the epicenter of a tragedy that would ripple through the entire suburban community. The police arrived just after dawn, their sirens cutting through the quiet of the neighborhood. As they entered the house, they were met with a chilling scene. Rebecca's lifeless body lay on the floor, surrounded by the remnants of the previous night's chaos. Her blood had dried on the hardwood floor, and the knife remained in the same position where it had pierced her body. Luke Hudson, still in shock from the violent turn of events, sat next to Rebecca's body, his hands stained with her blood. He stared blankly, unable to process the gravity of what had happened. His life had changed in an instant, and the weight of that realization left him paralyzed. Claire, though shaken by the events, remained calm as she spoke with the officers. Her family stood by her, offering support as she recounted the night's events with startling clarity. She explained how Rebecca had reacted violently after being exposed, how she had attacked her in a fit of rage, and how, in a tragic twist of fate, Rebecca had fallen on the knife that ended her life. Claire's calm demeanor struck the officers. She wasn't detached, but there was a sense of resolution in her voice. It was as if she had accepted the tragic outcome before anyone else could. The investigation began swiftly. The police collected evidence, took witness statements, and photographed the scene. They asked questions, trying to piece together the events leading up to the moment Rebecca died. As Claire and her family watched, they knew that life would never return to normal. This event would haunt them all, but for Claire, it also marked the end of a marriage that had been unraveling for years. 2 days later, on March 8th, Claire and Luke were called in for questioning. Claire, still processing the violent attack, was composed as she gave her statement. She spoke of Rebecca's erratic behavior, how the affair had slowly come to light, and how the confrontation escalated to the point of no return. The police were thorough, asking for every detail, but Claire answered each question with the same quiet certainty. She knew she had done nothing wrong, but the weight of Rebecca's death hung over her like a shadow. Luke, on the other hand, was a broken man. The affair, once a secret that had filled him with excitement, was now the source of his deepest shame. He corroborated Claire's version of events, admitting his guilt in the affair, but remaining emotionally detached from the tragedy that followed. As he spoke to the officers, his words were hollow, as though he was only half present. The weight of Rebecca's death, combined with the exposure of his betrayal, had left him in a state of numbness. Luke had never intended for things to go this far, but now he couldn't escape the consequences of his actions. By March 20th, after a detailed autopsy and a thorough review of witness testimonies, the police reached their conclusion. Rebecca's death had been accidental. The evidence supported Claire's account of the night, and no charges were filed against either Claire or Luke. But while the legal consequences were put to rest, the emotional fallout was just beginning. With Rebecca gone and the affair fully exposed, Claire and Luke's marriage, already damaged beyond repair, disintegrated. They had no children to consider, no deeper bond that could hold them together after everything that had happened. Claire, who had once been a loving and devoted wife, now saw no reason to remain in the marriage. She had suffered too much, endured too many years of emotional neglect and betrayal. Rebecca's death was the final blow in a relationship that had been decaying for years. Shortly after the investigation closed, Claire made the decision to leave. She filed for divorce in the early weeks of the April 2010, knowing that there was no way to salvage what was left. Luke, overwhelmed by guilt and the public scandal that followed, didn't fight her decision. He had been the cause of all this pain, and he couldn't face her or anyone after what had happened. The community, once a close-knit and quiet suburban enclave, became a hotbed of gossip. News of the affair spread quickly, and soon everyone was speculating about how deep Rebecca's relationship with Luke had gone. People whispered about the power Rebecca had wielded over Luke, manipulating him for her own desires, and wondered what secrets had died with her. The scandal rocked the town, and for weeks, it was all anyone could talk about. The Hudson home, once a symbol of success and stability, became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly things could fall apart when lies and betrayal took root. As Claire left the ruins of her marriage behind, she knew her life would never be the same. The emotional scars from the affair, the confrontation, and Rebecca's death would stay with her forever. But she was determined to move forward. She packed her belongings and moved out of the house that had once been filled with dreams, leaving behind the life she had once imagined for herself. Claire knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but after everything that had happened, she felt a strange sense of freedom. Luke, on the other hand, withdrew into isolation. The guilt of Rebecca's death weighed heavily on him, and he struggled to cope with the consequences of his choices. His career as a construction foreman, once thriving, began to suffer as he distanced himself from everyone around him. He no longer had the strength to pretend everything was fine. The memory of Rebecca's death haunted him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he had been responsible for the tragedy. Luke wasn't just mourning the loss of his lover. He was mourning the loss of himself. As the months passed, the town slowly moved on from the scandal, but for those involved, the trauma remained. Claire, though scarred by the events, began rebuilding her life piece by piece. She found new strength in the independence she had once been denied. Luke, on the other hand, remained trapped in a cycle of guilt and regret, unsure of how to move forward. The tragedy had not just been a death. It was the explosive end to a web of secrets and lies that had destroyed everything. And while the town speculated on the details of the affair and Rebecca's motivations, Claire and Luke were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. The question now was how they would ever find peace after such a devastating betrayal. I think not. This reminds me of another story we have on our channel, where a doctor's affair with 3 young women ended in obsession and murder. Please make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on our daily updates.